There comes a moment in every person's life when the noise becomes unbearable. The expectations, the judgments, the endless pursuit of validation, all weigh upon the soul like a chain forged by unseen hands. But when one turns inward, truly inward, and falls silent, something extraordinary begins to happen. The world, once chaotic and overwhelming, subtly begins to reorganize itself around the centered self. This is not mysticism, this is not escape. It is psychological alignment. And the journey begins when you decide to retreat not from life, but from the need to constantly explain yourself to it. Silence is often misinterpreted in our culture as a lack, as a void to be filled with words, action, or distraction. Yet silence in its truest form is one of the richest internal experiences a person can cultivate, because it is not absence, but presence without noise, a state in which the deeper truths of the psyche begin to emerge when the conscious mind steps aside and the unconscious finally has room to speak its ancient language, a language not formed in sentences but in symbols, sensations, and sudden insights. Those moments of clarity that arrive not when we are speaking or explaining ourselves, but when we have fallen into stillness so deep that we become aware of the currents moving beneath the surface of daily thought. And in this fertile quiet, one begins to recognize that so much of what is spoken in the external world is a defense, a mask, an effort to cover uncertainty, to secure belonging, to persuade others to see us in a particular light. But when we no longer feel the need to project that image, when we begin to trust that our value is not determined by how we are perceived, but by our own internal coherence, we become able to hold space for truth to emerge without interruption, without resistance. And in this space, a psychological ordering begins to take place, a realignment of our fragmented self, because silence gives us the courage to look at what we usually avoid, the fears we suppress, the wounds we minimize, the desires we are ashamed of. And as these pieces rise to the surface without judgment, without rush, they begin to integrate, to find their rightful place in our inner architecture. And from this integration arises a kind of calm power, one that is not aggressive or controlling, but deeply rooted, a power that doesn't need to convince or dominate, but simply is. And so, silent simplicity, social simplicity, social simplicity, social simplicity, social simplicity, social simplicity. Matthias, Celinda, says, and others feel it. Even if they cannot name it, they sense in your presence a kind of wholeness that draws them in. And yet the beauty of this path is that it is not dependent on others at all. It is a sacred contract between you and yourself, between you and the deeper currents of being that move within you. And as this relationship deepens, you find yourself speaking less and listening more, not just to others, but to life itself. To the quiet guidance that comes when your inner world is not cluttered with commentary or reaction, and from this stillness arises clarity, and from clarity comes a natural unfolding of action that does not feel forced but flows. And with this flow comes a new kind of alignment, not only within but with the outer world, because as your inner chaos settles, your external life begins to mirror that settled state. Relationships shift, environments become more harmonious, choices become more authentic. And even though you may still face challenges, you meet them with a different kind of presence, not as someone desperate for resolution, but as someone grounded in the deeper rhythms of their own truth. And this is the hidden richness of silence, that it does not merely quiet the mind, it reorders the soul. It grants you the ability to see what truly matters, and to let go of the rest, not with resistance, but with peace. And, in doing so, you create space for everything that was meant for you to arrive in its own time, not because you pursued it relentlessly, but because you became the kind of person who could receive it fully, silently, and without fear. You are the origin point of every thought you think, every emotion you feel, and every decision you make. Yet so often people are conditioned to place their focus entirely outward, onto others, onto circumstances, onto expectations and external validation, never stopping to realize that the truest form of change, power, and clarity can only emerge from within. And when you begin to focus on yourself, not in vanity or selfishness but in quiet responsibility, you begin to reclaim the pieces of your attention that have been scattered across everyone else's needs, opinions, and projections. And with that reclaimed energy, you start to rebuild something sacred, something grounded, something wholly yours. Because the inner self that you return to is not hollow or fragile but quietly waiting to be remembered. And as you return, as you choose to stop abandoning yourself for the sake of others' comfort, you begin to sense a deeper alignment take shape within you. And this alignment does not always arrive with a loud realization or dramatic transformation, but with small, almost imperceptible shifts in awareness, in boundaries, in the way you speak to yourself and move through the world. And with each of these shifts, your inner landscape becomes clearer, more ordered, more capable of sustaining the life you are meant to live, because the truth is that no one can walk your path for you. No one can think your thoughts or hold your pain or experience your growth. And that truth, while it may seem isolating at first, is actually your greatest source of strength, for it means that the power to evolve, to heal, to thrive, has always been and will always be within you. And once you embrace this, you begin to understand that focusing on yourself is not an act of turning away from the world, but of finally turning toward the self that the world tried to distract you from. And in doing so, you start to untangle the false identities that were shaped by trauma, fear, and survival, the parts of you that performed to be loved, that stayed small to be accepted, that silenced themselves to avoid conflict. And as these layers begin to fall away, not because you force them, but because you no longer need them, what remains is a self that is raw, true, and deeply whole. A self that does not rely on the unstable ground of others' opinions, but on the unshakable foundation of inner truth. And as you stand in that truth, you begin to feel a quiet resilience emerge. A resilience that does not need to shout or prove anything because it knows. And, in that knowing, you begin to make decisions not from fear, but from clarity, not from habit, but from conscious intention. And each decision further aligns your outer life with your inner values until the gap between who you are and how you live begins to disappear. And this is where the transformation becomes visible, not just to you, but to others. As your energy shifts, your boundaries strengthen, your presence deepens, and people begin to respond to you differently, not because you ask them to, but because your inner focus changed the entire frequency of your being. And though some may resist this shift, may challenge it, or even fall away, you no longer chase what no longer belongs, because you have come to understand that your only true obligation is to remain in integrity with yourself. And from that place of integrity, life begins to respond. Sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once, but always in reflection of the order you have created within. Because when you take responsibility for your energy, your choices, and your healing, the world around you begins to mirror that responsibility back to you in ways that are both subtle and profound. Detachment is often misunderstood as indifference, as emotional coldness or disengagement. Yet in its truest essence, detachment is a sacred clarity, a profound inner stance that allows you to witness life without becoming entangled in every reaction, every drama, every projection thrown your way. And when you reach this place of inner stillness, you begin to see the hidden architecture behind the noise, the psychological patterns at play within yourself and within others. And suddenly, what once provoked you loses its power. What once demanded your attention no longer controls your energy, because you have shifted from being a reactor to being an observer, not out of passivity, but out of wisdom, because in this space of detachment, your vision sharpens, You begin to recognize the unconscious loops you used to repeat, the emotional triggers that once dictated your choices, and the way you used to grasp at people, outcomes, and situations out of fear or lack. And as this awareness grows, so too does your power, not a power that seeks to dominate or control, but a quiet, rooted presence that no longer needs validation from external forces to feel whole. And when you stop needing life to look a certain way, when you stop trying to force people to stay or outcomes to manifest on your timeline, something miraculous begins to unfold. Because life, no longer pushed or resisted, begins to move with its own intelligence, and the people who resonate with your truth begin to appear. Without coercion, the opportunities aligned with your deeper self begin to emerge, not through striving, but through synchronicity. And what no longer serves begins to fall away, not in chaos, but in natural release, because you are no longer feeding it with your energy. And this is the paradox of detachment, that by letting go, you receive. By stepping back, you see more clearly. By no longer needing to control, you allow life to show you what was always meant to be yours. And in this surrender, you discover a new kind of freedom, one that is not reckless but rooted, not careless but conscious, a freedom that allows you to choose without pressure, to walk away without guilt, to stay without fear. And as you live from this place, others may not understand you, they may accuse you of being distant or hard to read, but you are not hiding, you are holding your space, and in that space is power. In that space is self-respect. In that space is the wisdom of someone who has stopped trying to save others at the cost of themselves, who has stopped leaking energy into places that no longer reflect their truth. And this form of detachment does not isolate you from others, but brings you into deeper intimacy with reality, because you are no longer engaging from a place of need or illusion, but from presence. And presence is the foundation of real connection, of authentic decisions, of meaningful life paths that do not drain but nourish you. And though this path may sometimes feel lonely, though you may watch old relationships fade and familiar roles dissolve, you come to see this too as part of the unfolding, as part of the necessary shedding that clears space for what truly resonates. And you no longer chase clarity because you live in it. You no longer seek answers from the world because you hear them rising within. And all of this transformation becomes possible when you stop clinging, when you stop grasping for control, and instead begin to trust the intelligence of your own soul to guide you through silence, through distance, through letting go, into a life that aligns not with your fears but with your highest inner order, with your most grounded and unshakable self. The more you begin to align with your inner truth, the less compelled you feel to explain yourself to others, because the constant urge to justify, to defend, to prove your worth or your decisions stems from an internal misalignment, a place within that still believes validation must come from outside. And yet when you begin to truly know yourself, not in fragments or borrowed ideas, but in the deep, lived experience of your own presence, you start to recognize how unnecessary external approval becomes. And this recognition does not arrive in a single moment, but grows slowly, like a steady flame that refuses to be extinguished. A quiet assurance that begins to radiate from within, even when no one acknowledges it. And from this place of alignment, your energy begins to change. Your words become fewer but more intentional, your actions more deliberate and rooted. And people start to feel something different in you, even if they can't articulate what it is, because what they're sensing is coherence, an inner consistency that doesn't waver with opinions or trends or temporary emotions. And this coherence cannot be faked. It cannot be worn like a mask or summoned in performance. It must be cultivated through time spent in silence, in self-honesty, in choosing integrity even when it's uncomfortable or misunderstood. And as this alignment deepens, you begin to see how much of your past suffering came from the need to be seen in a certain light, how much energy you spent trying to mold yourself into someone acceptable, impressive, agreeable, how often you said yes when your soul whispered no, how often you stayed silent when truth trembled on your lips. And now, as you release that need, not out of bitterness, but out of awakening, you begin to walk differently. Not with arrogance, but with quiet certainty, and the world begins to reflect back the ardor you've created inside, because life always mirrors our internal state, and the more you live in truth, the more the false falls away, the more illusions are stripped, and though this shedding can be painful, it also becomes liberating. So it is. With awareness, we can become self-aware, and the more we pace the path, the more we become self-aware, and the more we pace the path, the more we become self-aware, and the more we pace the path, the more we become self-aware, and the more we pace the path, the more we become self-aware, and the more we pace the path, the more we become self-aware, and the more we pace the path, the more we become self-aware, and the more we, because in losing what was never real, you make space for what is. And this space becomes a sacred ground where authenticity can grow, not rushed, not manipulated, but allowed to unfold in its own rhythm. And the people who remain or arrive in this space do so not because you chased them, not because you made yourself smaller to be loved, but because they recognize something real, something grounded, something that does not sway with every wind of opinion. And in this state, you no longer need to explain your boundaries, because your presence sets them clearly. You no longer need to justify your path, because your energy walks it with conviction, and though others may still question or challenge you, you do not shrink or lash out, because you no longer live in reaction. You live in response to your inner compass, and the compass is quiet. It does not shout, it does not demand to be understood, it simply guides. And the more you trust it, says Paul Scott. His second endeavor was filmmaking. He made his one film, and it was based on the 1964 novel by the same author as The Compass is Quiet. It does not shrink or lash out, but instead produces understanding, kindness, and compassion. The more life begins to feel less like a struggle and more like a flow, not because it's free of pain or difficulty, but because you are no longer resisting your own truth, no longer abandoning yourself in search of belonging, and from this profound inner loyalty, everything begins to fall into place in ways that are subtle yet undeniable, in ways that may take time yet carry a weight of permanence. And as you walk this path, you realize you are not here to be universally understood. You are here to be deeply authentic, not here to impress, but to embody, not here to prove, but to live from a truth so steady it cannot be shaken by noise or doubt or rejection. The path of silence and self-focus is not easy. It demands courage to sit with discomfort, to witness the unconscious, to leave behind the addiction to noise and praise. But on the other side of that stillness lies transformation. You are not here to convince the world of your worth. You are here to remember it. And in that remembering, in that sacred silence, everything that belongs to you will find you. Not because you chased it, but because you became still enough to receive it. Let the world make its noise. Let it demand your voice. But you choose silence, choose focus, and watch, quietly, steadily, as everything falls into place,